So the metric has totally changed. It's not about pulling all-nighters or dominating meetings anymore. The real question is, how motionless can you remain on the inside while the world is just violently changing around you?
It's a test of internal stability, not external force. And that leads us right to defining quiet power.
Hey everyone, welcome to Resilient Inspirations. We're here to share ideas, swap stories, and just see where the conversation takes us. Nothing fancy, just real talk with a spark of inspiration. Let's dive in. I'll hand it over to the crew.
Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is, well, it's really laser focused. We are cutting through all the noise of modern business.
So much noise.
Right. To deliver what is essentially a complete operating system for leadership, specifically for where we are now, in the mid-2020s.
And you've brought us a really a profound stack of sources today. They're all centered around this new archetype, the flow state leader.
And this practice of quiet power.
Exactly. What's so crucial about these sources is how they nail the core tension of our time. We have all this unprecedented speed, all this connectivity from technology.
Which should be making us more effective.
It should. But the reality is that the sheer volume of information, the constant pings, the pressure, it just fragments our attention. It amplifies all this noise, both outside and inside our own heads.
And the conclusion is pretty stark.
It's that the most powerful leaders today, the most influential ones, they're not the loudest anymore. They're not the most frantic. They're actually the calmest minds. They're the ones who have mastered this quiet power.
That just resonates so much because I think everyone feels that fragmentation. So what we're looking at is a blueprint, really. It's from a text called Flow State Leader, Master Innovation with Quiet Power. And it's designed to give you, our listener, the actual protocols for these high-pressure environments.
Right.
But before we get into the how, I want to frame the stakes. This isn't just about feeling better, is it? This is about measurable performance.
Oh, it's entirely about performance. The sources are clear. All those unaddressed emotions, the distractions, the indecisiveness.
They don't just vanish.
No. They build up. They accumulate into what the research actually defines as cognitive debt.
Cognitive debt. That's a powerful term.
And it's a debt that demands interest. That interest comes in the form of, diminished capacity and making these reactive, costly mistakes.
So what happens when a leader defaults on that debt?
Well, when they get locked into that chronic reactive state, their ability to make high-quality decisions just plummets. There was a major Fortune 500 study in 2024 that tracked this very thing.
What did they look at?
They meticulously tracked 200 senior executives, looking at biomarkers like cortisol, the stress hormone, and something called heart rate variability, or HRV.
Right. HRV is a measure of how adaptive your nervous system is.
Exactly. A low HRV means you're locked down, you're stressed. And the study showed that leaders with high cortisol and low HRV, well, the results were staggering.
So this is the physiological signature of stress. What was the outcome?
They had a 40% higher frequency of reversible decisions.
40%.
A 40% higher frequency compared to their calmer peers. And a reversible decision isn't a small mistake. We're talking about a commitment of time, of money, of people.
That has to be undone. All that rework.
All that costly rework, often within the same quarter. It's millions of dollars lost, not to mention the damage to morale and trust. You're literally paying interest on that cognitive debt.
So our goal in this deep dive is to unpack this flow state leader archetype.
The leader who just refuses to pay that tax, this is someone who operates from a place of, tranquil authority, where clarity just naturally replaces the disorder.
And by the end of this, you will have the actual protocols to maintain that calm mind under fire, and the frameworks to build team synergy so you can replace that chaos with collective creativity.
That's the promise.
Okay, so let's start with that fundamental shift. The sources call it moving from noise over signal to signal over noise.
This is the paradigm shift of 2025. A decade ago, leaders were rewarded for having the most data or for just being the most visible, the most on.
Working the longest hours.
Right. But the world is moving so fast now that just accumulating data leads to paralysis. What's needed is that rapid, focused insight that cuts through everything else.
And there's research that backs up this quieter approach.
Oh, absolutely. A 2025 McKinsey study of 500 executives, it's crystal clear. The leaders who showed a high degree of internal calm under pressure.
The ones who minimize their own cognitive noise.
Yes. They achieved 28% higher innovation velocity. And that's not just coming up with ideas, that's the speed and effectiveness of actually implementing those ideas.
So the metric has totally changed. It's not about pulling all-nighters or dominating meetings anymore. The real question is, how motionless can you remain on the inside while the world is just violently changing around you?
It's a test of internal stability, not external force. And that leads us right to defining quiet power.
Okay.
And this is a really vital distinction. Quiet power is not the absence of strength. It's not weakness.
It's control over strength.
It is absolute control over strength. And these are aptitudes, they're skills you can develop, not personality traits you're born with.
That's a key point. So you don't have to be an introvert to be a flow state leader.
Not at all.
So let's drill down. What are the 3 core traits of quiet power?
Okay, so the 3 pillars are presence, resonance, and radiance. First up is presence. This is the foundation.
What does that mean in practice?
It means occupying the present moment completely. You're not burdened by what happened yesterday or anxious about what might happen tomorrow. When a leader with presence is talking to you, they are 100% there.
Their mind isn't scrolling through their inbox.
No. And if you're not present, you are, by definition, paying that cognitive debt. Your attention is split. It's diluted.
Okay, so that's presence. What's the second one?
Resonance. This one is more nuanced. It's the ability to read and regulate the emotional field of a room.
Without adding to the noise yourself.
That's the crucial part. It means you can sense the underlying fear or the exhaustion or the excitement, the subtle stuff. And then you adjust your own state to provide a counterbalance. Or maybe to amplify it if that's what's needed.
So you become the emotional thermostat for the team.
What a great way to put it. You absorb and stabilize rather than just adding more heat or pressure.
And the third trait?
The third is radiance. This is what emerges when that inner alignment meets your outer action. It's the natural influence, the serene authority.
It's not forced.
Not at all. When a leader is consistently operating from presence and resonance, their actions just carry more weight. Their authority comes from that calm and authenticity, not from volume.
And we've got data that shows this internal state translates to external results.
We do. A massive 2025 Gallup meta-analysis. They looked at 10,000 leaders, and they isolated these quiet power traits.
And what did they find?
Leaders with high levels of presence, resonance, and radiance showed a 35% increase in team engagement, which says everything about trust.
35% is huge.
And a 22% decrease in project delivery time. When people feel that psychological safety, that calm at the top, they can move faster, they make fewer mistakes.
The results are just undeniable. So let's make this real. The sources cite some incredible real-world prototypes. Let's start with Satya Nadella at Microsoft.
Nadella is just a textbook example. His tenure began in 2014, and it was such a stark contrast to the more assertive styles that came before him. His influence came from this aggressive curiosity. He just listened.
And I'm really curious about a specific practice he used.
It's fascinating. The sources say he would often start high-stakes meetings with a period of silence.
Deliberate silence.
Yes, very intentional. It wasn't awkward. It forced everyone who would normally rush to fill that void to just pause, to think, to make sure their contribution was signal, not noise.
And the outcome of that cultural shift?
The entire Microsoft culture shifted. It went from this internally competitive, almost defensive place to one of open curiosity. And during his tenure, the company's revenue and market cap tripled. It proves quiet power can scale to the absolute highest levels.
Then there's Indra Nooyi at PepsiCo. She had that performance with purpose approach.
And her ability to balance those two things, hard financials and social responsibility, it was rooted in self-regulation. That's a core piece of quiet power.
And she had a specific practice for that.
She did. The sources highlight her rigorous nightly journaling. And this wasn't just a to-do list. It was a way for her to process the immense pressure of her job to maintain her own emotional balance.
So how does journaling translate from self-care to leadership of a giant corporation?
Because it ensures the leader is making decisions from a place of clarity, from presence, not from emotional reactivity, not from cognitive debt. By stabilizing her own internal world, she could then execute that complex external strategy with total consistency.
And we also have a more contemporary example, Lena, a startup founder in Berlin.
Yes, a great example of how this works in a single high-stakes moment. She was in a final pitch to some notoriously skeptical investors.
So the energy in the room was already defensive.
Totally, and she knew that. So instead of just launching into her slides, she started the entire presentation with a deliberate, 30-second pause.
30 seconds of silence. That must have felt like an eternity.
I'm sure it did, but what it did was demonstrate absolute composure. It exuded tranquility, and that stillness, it just commanded their attention. It completely disrupted their skepticism.
It shifted them from a critical mindset to a receptive one.
Precisely, and she got the funding. That pause wasn't empty space, it was a strategic tool. She used her inner calm to reset the entire energy of the room.
These examples really show the range. Okay, before we move on, let's talk about the biological engine behind all this, the neuroscience.
Right, let's get into the why it works.
We need to understand what's physically happening in the brain.
Yeah.
So let's contrast the two states. The brain in chaos versus the brain in flow.
The brain in chaos is basically in survival mode. Think of your nervous system as a security alarm that's constantly being triggered by notifications, deadlines, difficult conversations.
And when that stress is prolonged,
The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detector, it just takes over. It initiates that fight or flight response, flooding your system with cortisol.
and what does that do to our ability to lead?
It effectively shuts down access to your prefrontal cortex, the PFC. That's the part of your brain responsible for all the high-level stuff, strategic planning, impulse control, complex decisions. You become purely reactive. You get stuck in these worry loops.
The flow state leader refuses to pay that tax.
Exactly. They refuse. And when they choose calm instead, when they enter a flow state, the biological reward is immense.
So what does that look like? The brain in flow.
You get this effortless focus. Time seems to dilate or even disappear. Insights just emerge spontaneously. And it's not relaxation. It's a state of optimal energy management. The brain is hyper-focused only on what's relevant.
And a key mechanism for this is something called the default mode network, the DMN. The sources call it the daydreaming engine.
I love that name for it. The DMN is like your brain's background operating system. It's a network that activates when you stop focusing on an external task.
So when your mind is quiet.
Yes, when it's tranquil. During a walk, or right after one of these breathing exercises, the DMN fires up and it starts to weave together all these disparate things, distant memories, your imagination, insights you've gathered.
So if I'm constantly scrolling or reacting to messages, I'm basically shutting down my own genius engine.
You are actively impeding it. A cluttered mind can't run its essential system updates. The quiet innovator understands this. They protect those moments of stillness to allow this powerful background processing to happen.
Let's get into the neurochemistry. It's not just brain regions, it's a specific cocktail of chemicals, right?
It's a very specific cocktail. The main players are dopamine and norepinephrine.
Dopamine is the reward molecule.
It is, but here it surges in response to meaningful progress. It enhances your motivation and gives you that feeling of, well, joyful creation. And then you have norepinephrine.
What's its role?
Norepinephrine acts like a camera lens, tightening its focus. It sharpens your attention and just filters out all the distractions. So you get the pleasure from dopamine and the precision from norepinephrine.
And that's what creates that feeling of effortlessness.
That's the nexus. It's where your skill perfectly meets the challenge. And the quiet innovator cultivates this equilibrium through intentional calm, not through frantic external stimulation.
This brings us to a concept that sounds very complex. Transient hypofrontality.
It sounds intimidating, but it's really the science of letting go. Hypofrontality just means a temporary reduction of activity in the prefrontal cortex.
The part of the brain with our inner critic.
Exactly, the part that houses your judgment, your internal editor. And it's transient, so it's temporary and deliberate.
But why would we want to turn down our critical voice?
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive for leadership.
Because when you're trying to innovate, that critical voice can be paralyzing. It second-guesses everything. It censors new ideas before they're even fully formed.
So this is a deliberate strategy.
It's a strategy of acquiescence. You let the inner critic step back for a moment. This allows your mind to enter a state of pure potential, where ideas can flow with minimal restraint. It's not a lack of motivation, it's a strategy of liberation.
And we have some incredible data that validates this.
The data is just astonishing. A 2024 study from the Flow Research Collective used real-time EEG measuring brain waves on executives during high-stakes tasks.
And what did they find?
The subjects who got into a measurable flow state, which they induced with simple, calm rituals beforehand, they showed a 490% increase in creative problem-solving performance.
490%. That's almost 5 times the output.
5 times. Just from cultivating intentional tranquility. It proves that calm is literally the trigger that lets the brain operate like a superconductor for insight.
And the sources connect this biology back to our interactions with other people through mirror neurons.
Right. So mirror neurons are what allow us to feel empathy, to not just understand what someone is feeling, but to actually feel it.
And stress gets in the way of that.
Emotional clutter, stress, reactivity, it all diminishes their activity. So when a quiet innovator stays calm, their mirror neurons can fully activate. This turns simple observation into profound, strategic, human insight.
Give us an example of that.
Okay, think of the product manager in Berlin from the source material. She was getting bad data on a new feature. Instead of just looking at the dashboards, she spent 30 minutes silently observing users.
So she was using presence.
Total presence. And because she was calm, her mirror neurons fired up. She could actually feel the user's subtle frustration, the hesitant clicks, the sighs. She resonated with the feeling, not just the data point. And that allowed her to redesign the feature in a way that was deeply human, and it became a huge success.
So for anyone listening who wants to start applying this immediately, the sources give us a first neurohack for daily flow.
Yes, a very simple practice. You can do it anywhere. Just find a quiet spot, close your eyes, inhale and exhale slowly, and really focus on the feeling of your feet on the ground.
That's the grounding part.
Exactly. Then, as you exhale, you practice letting go. You release one thought, just one. Visualize it dissipating like a cloud. It could be a worry, a task, anything.
The final step.
The final step is to identify one simple feeling of gratitude. The coffee you're drinking, a colleague who helped you, and you just hold that feeling for a couple of breaths.
And this practice shifts you from that reactive mode to a receptive, integrated state of thinking.
In under 3 minutes. The sources mention a designer in Tokyo who does this before every single sketch session. It's the silent invitation for ideas to emerge from insight, not from pressure.
Okay, so that's the neurology.
Okay.
Let's move to the inner game, the behavioral tools. The sources call emotional intelligence, or EQ, the silent engine.
It's the infrastructure for quiet power. It's what allows you to take a huge challenge and turn it into a manageable opportunity. And we need to look at two core parts of EQ, self-awareness and self-regulation.
Let's start with self-awareness, the spark. The sources define it as an objective perception of yourself without ego or fear. Tell us about Arjun's story after his failed launch.
So Arjun's big new product failed to get any traction. It was a public setback. His immediate gut reaction was to blame the engineering team.
That's a pretty common reaction.
Very common. But because he was practicing this framework, he paused. Instead of reacting, he asked himself, how did my impatience play a role here?
That's a huge reframe. What did he discover?
He realized that he had pushed the team to cut corners on quality assurance because he was afraid of missing some arbitrary market window. And that awareness, it wasn't about beating himself up. It was about gentle curiosity.
What is my role in the chaos?
Exactly. And by understanding his own role, he was able to shift from a reactive state to becoming a calming presence for his team.
And then self-regulation is where you apply that awareness. That's the steering wheel.
That's where you choose a composed response instead of an impulsive one. Leela's story is a perfect example here.
Right. She got that call from a major client.
A client who was threatening to terminate their contract because of a service outage. Her pulse started racing. She felt that surge of anger. The old Leela would have gotten defensive.
But she regulated that response.
She did. In that brief window, she identified the emotion underneath the anger, which was fear of loss. She recognized the fear, took a deep breath, and physically slowed down her rate of speech.
And what did she say?
She said, I fully acknowledge your frustration. Let's set the agenda aside and focus completely on finding a solution together.
And it worked.
It totally disarmed the client. That's the key.
Right.
Regulation isn't suppression. You don't ignore the anger or fear. You just channel its energy into a constructive, composed response.
Which leads us to the next element, energy flow. The sources call it the invisible currency of leadership.
It's a profound idea. Leadership in 2025 isn't about how many hours you work. It's about the quality of the energy you bring to each moment, and that energy is a finite resource.
So you have to manage it like one.
If you treat it as infinite, you risk total insolvency personally and for your organization. You have to respect the body's natural cycles, the ultradian rhythms.
These are the 90-minute cycles of high energy and then a dip.
Yes. Our mental acuity moves in these predictable waves. If you ignore the midday dip and just power through with caffeine, you're setting yourself up for exhaustion and, more importantly, for making reactive, poor quality decisions in the afternoon.
The sources talk about a founder in Nairobi who learned this the hard way.
She did. She was burning out. But when she started honoring that rhythm, doing her deep strategic work in the morning, taking a real break midday and using her afternoon energy surge for creative team meetings, everything changed. The quality of her decisions skyrocketed.
But the modern world is just full of these energy leaks.
They're insidious. The constant notifications, dozens of open tabs, the expectation of being instantly available on team chats.
It's like your energy is being siphoned off without your consent.
It is. It's being allocated to everyone else's priorities. The VP in Sydney is a great case study. She realized that checking her email first thing in the morning set a reactive tone for her entire day.
So she created a boundary.
A strict one. No email before 10 a.m. And what happened was her focus became profound. Her strategic output shot up. Her presence in morning meetings was calmer, more authoritative. Every time you silence a notification or close a tab, you're reclaiming your own energy.
Okay, so let's bring all this together with the big practical tool, the 7-minute morning flow ritual.
This is maybe the single most important habit. It's an act of sovereignty. You're reclaiming the first moments of the day before the world can inject its noise. It's short, just 7 minutes, but it's built on 3 pillars: a tranquil body, a lucid mind, and an invigorated purpose.
So let's break it down. First is breath as the gateway. That's 2 minutes.
Right. You find a comfortable seat, you inhale slowly through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, and then you exhale slowly through your mouth for 6 or 8 counts. That longer exhale is key. It signals safety to your nervous system almost instantly.
Next is movement to activate for 5 minutes. This isn't a workout.
No, it's gentle activation, rolling your shoulders, circling your neck. It's about counteracting stiffness and getting blood flowing to the brain. It literally creates space for new ideas.
And the third pillar is EQ alignment. 3 minutes to set your emotional tone.
This is a moment of profound choice. You ask yourself, what energy do I choose to lead with today? Is it curiosity? Is it composure? You choose your internal filter for the day instead of letting circumstances choose it for you.
And finally, you ignite the system with visualization.
Yes, you close your eyes and you mentally rehearse the day. You see yourself navigating challenges with calm, inspiring your team. The brain treats vividly imagined experiences as real, which strengthens the neural pathways for high performance. It's like a cognitive rehearsal for success.
So we've built the internal system. Now we have to apply it to the big 3 stress tests: crisis, teams, and decisions. A crisis is the ultimate test, isn't it?
It strips away all pretense. It reveals your true operating system. When a crisis hits, the leader who stays calm becomes the gravitational center for everyone else.
Because physiologically, a crisis is designed to shut down our higher thinking.
It is. The amygdala floods you with adrenaline and cortisol, and your prefrontal cortex goes offline. The quiet innovator has a protocol to interrupt that biological hijacking.
Which brings us back to that tool for high-pressure moments.
Yeah.
The 60-second calm protocol.
Yes, the 4 steps. First, feel the ground. Put all your attention on your feet on the floor. It's non-negotiable grounding.
Second, breathe.
A slow inhale and a long, slow, even audible exhale. That's the physiological disruptor.
Third, name the emotion.
Silently to yourself. This is panic. This is anger. You acknowledge it without letting it drive you.
And fourth, ask the question.
What is the subsequent appropriate course of action right now? That question pulls your brain out of the emotional spiral and back into the PFC for rational thought.
And a key part of this is reframing the crisis itself.
Yes, you reframe crisis as data, not as failure.
Yeah.
The product lead in Berlin, after her big launch failed, she immediately told the team, this isn't failure, this is necessary feedback. That one sentence changed the entire team's neurochemistry from panic to possibility.
Okay, next up, how this composure extends to team flow and shared calm. The idea that a leader's nervous system is contagious.
It absolutely is. When you model quiet power, the team's collective stress just drops. Your internal rhythm becomes their external rhythm. And a huge part of this is reading the room with EQ.
So going beyond the words.
Looking for the clipped tones, the crossed arms, the hesitation. Arjun, again, is a great example. He noticed a key developer giving these really terse updates.
And the old Arjun would have pushed for the deadline.
Right. But the quiet Arjun recognized that tone as a signal of burnout. So he paused the meeting and just said, it sounds like you might be carrying a heavy burden right now.
And what happened?
The developer opened up about some intense family pressures. The team rallied around him. And by addressing the human issue, not just the task, Arjun built a foundation of trust that made the team far more productive in the long run.
To do that, you first have to create psychological safety.
It is the absolute foundation for creativity. Leela, the leader we talked about, she starts every single meeting with a 60-second check-in.
One word for your state, one intention for the meeting.
Exactly. That simple, minute signals that the people in the room matter more than the agenda. And the sources show that practice alone can double a team's willingness to share risky, innovative ideas.
And the quiet leader also facilitates breakthrough conversations by not dominating.
They create space. Priya had that marketing team that wanted to be bold and an engineering team that wanted to be cautious.
An impasse.
A total impasse. But instead of choosing a side, she just asked an open-ended question. What does boldness look like when it's combined with safety?
That reframes the entire problem.
It does. And then she let the silence hang in the air. She was comfortable with the uncertainty. And in that silence, a third, much more innovative path emerged that neither side had seen on their own.
Finally, decision flow. The idea that we need to harmonize intuition with data, the myth of the purely logical leader is dead.
It's completely a myth. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, not calculators. And in an age of big data, more data often just leads to paralysis.
So optimal decisions balance the two.
Exactly. Data is the map, it shows you the terrain, but intuition is the compass. It tells you the right direction for this specific moment.
And intuition isn't magic, it's neurological.
Not at all. It's your brain's supercomputer processing years of experience and pattern recognition faster than conscious thought. It's a summation of unconscious data.
We have that example of the founder in Nairobi.
Right. The data on the funding deal looked perfect. The numbers, the market fit, everything. But she felt this deep physical sense of discord. She trusted that feeling, paused the deal, and later found a hidden clause in the contract that would have been disastrous for her.
Her intuition was a protective predictor.
When the data was actually misleading. And that ratio between data and intuition, it's not fixed. For a logistics decision, it might be 95% data. For a decision about trust or timing, it might be 80% intuition. The skill is knowing when to adjust the ratio.
And there's a rhythm to this, a process.
A 4-part rhythm, a pre-decision ritual to calm your mind, then meticulous data review, then an intuition check. What does my body know? And finally, a post-decision reflection. What did I learn?
So as we wrap up, this deep dive really shows that quiet power isn't just a management style. It's a complete, scientifically backed operating system for leadership.
It is. And the legacy of a leader who uses it, it persists long after they're gone. It's not just measured in revenue, it's measured in the culture they create.
Personal practice becomes collective wisdom.
It happens through embodiment, not policy. The VP in Sydney, with her 7-minute ritual, half her department adopted it without her ever saying a word. Her personal composure just became the cultural norm through resonance.
And the sources had this wonderful way of describing the unmeasurable metrics of that legacy.
Yeah, you look for the subtle things, teams that laugh often, decisions that just feel right, that resonate, a culture where it's okay to say, I don't know, because mistakes are seen as feedback.
The Della shifting Microsoft towards curiosity. Nui integrating purpose with profit. These are the legacies of quiet influence.
And the eternal flow blueprint to do this is deceptively simple. Start your day with intention, face challenges with composure, end with reflection and gratitude.
The world is only going to get faster and louder.
It will, but your ability to remain steady, to think deeply while everyone else is just reacting, that is what will set you and your team apart.
So if this has resonated with you, the next step is moving this from a concept into your character.
And the source material lays out a path for that. The 21-day flow state challenge.
21 days is cited as that neurological sweet spot, the time it takes to turn conscious effort into unconscious flow. It's a 3-week arc.
Week 1 is awakening calm.
Establishing that inner rhythm. Week 2 is igniting energy, channeling that calm into creative action.
And week 3 is radiating flow.
Extending that quiet power outward to your team. It's a commitment, but the daily practice is manageable.
So if we leave you with one final provocative thought from all this material, let it be this. The most enduring influence isn't built on volume.
The real battleground for leadership isn't the marketplace or the boardroom. It is quite simply your own mind. Mastering your internal state is the highest leverage strategy there is for mastering external innovation and building a culture that truly thrives.
The path is clear. The power is quiet. And the future belongs to the steady mind.
And that's a wrap for today's chat. Big thanks to my friends for keeping the conversation flowing, and to you for hanging out with us. If you like this talk, don't forget to share it and hit follow so you won't miss the next one. Take care, stay inspired, and we'll catch up soon.